Good morning, Father Merrill. Wait, on this March 31st, 2019, can you tell me, Father Wade, what's the sermon about today?
Today's sermon is taken from the Gospel of Luke on Jesus' story, which we now call the prodigal son. But basically it's an answer. The story of the prodigal son is an answer to the question, why does Jesus sit with people that the leaders in his community think are wrong or sinful? Why does he have dinner with them and care for them? This requires patience and humility to understand, but it's good news.
In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, be seated. So the Pharisees and the scribes are troubled. They're troubled because they see Jesus sharing food at meal, at table, with people who are outside God's welcome in the traditional understanding of who belongs, who doesn't. There was almost a technical term, it's called sinners. And sinners were people who represented by their very being what was wrong in God's world, what was shameful, what was sinful. And a sinner could be like a Jewish person who served as a tax collector on behalf of the Romans and was abusive and threatening and coercive. And it's that sense of, this person just doesn't belong to us. This person deserves no mercy. A prostitute, a woman in that culture, often forced into that type of thing by poverty, became like a scapegoat for that community. And there were many that if you even spoke to a prostitute, you were guilty of tremendous shame yourself. You were experiencing shame. And the story can go on. The list of people who stood outside of acceptability to the authorities of Judaism in the first century. Gentiles, Samaritans, it goes on. And in this there is not meant to be, in a life well lived by a holy and good person, especially a teacher of God, there's not meant to be inclusion of the people who have been excluded. And so the Pharisees are grumbling. We all know what grumbling and mumbling is like. And you just can't believe he's doing that. I can't believe he's doing that. What's wrong with this guy? There's something. It's not just we don't agree with him. That's the language we use in our disputes with people. We don't agree with each other. It's more of a in the gut sense of this is wrong. This is unacceptable. Unacceptable. So Jesus tells them a parable about a father with two sons and apparently some estate of sorts with slaves and hired hands and others. And the son, in a direct sort of insult to his father, says, give me my half of what I will inherit when you die, because in a sense you're dead to me. So it's the most wicked kind of expectation that this young son has. There's nothing about the young son about which you're really supposed to feel a whole lot of connection to. If you're hearing this story in the first century, you're to be disgusted by the behavior of this young son. And you certainly understand the behavior of the elder brother at the end of the story. So the son, the father, without comment, by the story, without comment, gives him his half of the estate. He goes off and spends it in dissolute living. He ends up feeding pigs, which, if this is a Jewish boy, this is the worst sort of scenario of how pigs are not kosher, right? I mean, so you're feeding pigs, and actually you're so hungry, your desire to eat what the pigs eat. So you're in this famine, but in some respects, it seems a bit deserved to be in that famine. And so this whole story is Jesus is created for these Pharisees and scribes, these folks that were grumbling at Jesus. He is creating a narrative that is intolerable, to make his point. Intolerable. What this youngest son has done is intolerable. Jesus sits at table with people who, for these Pharisees and scribes, are intolerable. And when we sit at a table, if you think about a table, a dining room table, unless it's just enormous, theoretically you can see each other. You can't hide too well. At a dining room table where all are seated, unless they're just somebody is really young and they just can't quite get their chin above the table, all eyes can be seen. And the body language is obvious. And it's very difficult to conceal body language and eye contact. It seems to me part of what has upset the Pharisees and the scribes who are grumbling, which sounds just sort of non-threatening. But this is about as intense a situation as you can conceive of. What's upsetting them the most is not that he's sitting at the table. That's bad enough. But they must see in Jesus' eyes and in his body language what his heart has to say, as well as what his voice has to say. And what they are viscerally angry at is the kindness, the welcome, the affection of this stunning and impossible mercy and care for people at that table. St. Paul calls it the reconciliation. And it's the idea that across whatever boundary we can erect amongst nations, people, sexual orientation, race, national government, politics, all the sorts of things that divide us, is St. Paul's advice is not to just rush out and pretend like we can forgive, but to be reconciled to God. Be reconciled to God, St. Paul says. Jesus is reconciling those thought of as sinners to one another and to God. But it begins when you think about that relationship that has really broken your heart or you've broken another's heart. And there is tremendous pain and suffering. No amount of begging can save such a relationship. You can't make somebody forgive you. However, I can go to God. I can go to God for reconciliation. And that opens up an internal possibility of an inner change and a kind of belief and a deep sense of faith and trust that I can pass through, that I can be a new creation in spite of what I suffer. Being reconciled to God is the beginning. And in the story, the prodigal son comes home thinking, I could just be a hired hand. But in fact, if the father is the representation of God, the father's on the road, not just delighted, but fully embracing this son of his that he thought he would never see again. That is who God is, and who each of us, for whom Jesus not only taught parables such as this, but his life, up to the very last seconds of his breath, was going to God, to be reconciled to God for us and our salvation. He stretched out his arms upon the cross and gave himself freely as a son, that nothing can separate us from the love of God, that God will go to any length to welcome you and me home. And that's the beginning of reconciliation between us and those for whom we need it. Because what God wants to build into our experience, which is really hard for me, is humility and patience. Humility and patience. The capacity to stay in the presence, in prayer, in the study of Scripture, to stay in the presence of God long enough to experience healing, and to develop that sense of trust that I am in fact becoming a new creation, and that I am in fact an ambassador for reconciliation as I seek to be reconciled to God. The good news in this story is that nothing can separate us from God's, not just God's deigning to forgive us, but God's presence on the road waiting for us, waiting to celebrate with us, to bring the healing in those places where we're hurting. And it's no secret that the elder son, who resents the affection for the young son, for whom I completely identify and totally understand, that the elder son is the caricature of the Pharisees and the scribes, who just can't stand to see somebody have a chance to be forgiven and loved. And I understand that. But in patience and whatever amount of humility is just telling ourselves the truth. I can't in this Lenten season. I can't yearn to be reconciled to God and allow God to guide me forward. So on this Lord's Day, when we come together, come to the altar today with that deep sense of patience and yearning for that welcome. And when you receive your communion today, know that this is a step. This is a good step towards being reconciled with the Father, who waits for you and me, out on the road, ready to celebrate with us. And maybe even in that moment, we can welcome that little brother home too. And sometimes that little brother is us. So be reconciled